Mr. President, finally we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it is not a train. It is, in fact, the eventual and necessary passage of the XM reauthorization bill. As you know, last week, the XM bill passed the House by a vote that was 72% in favor. We have been told for months and months here as we debate the XM Bank that this bill as a standalone could not possibly pass the House as a standalone bill. Remarkably, when that myth was put to the test, we found out that not just 51%, but 72% of the House supports reauthorization of the XM bill. Last night, we faced another challenge for the XM bill, which was, in fact, a series of amendments on the XM portion of the transportation bill. And once again, we exceeded expectations by having supermajorities on almost, in fact, all of these amendments suffering defeat at a very wide margin. And so now what we know is that we have a bill which continues to have broad-based support and continues to represent the necessary steps that need to be taken to reauthorize and reopen the XM Bank. So let's just recount history here. The Export-Import Bank's been closed for over 3 months, preventing needed support for small business across the country. Many of those small businesses, guess where they are? They're in states like North Dakota. A lot of people, and my colleague who's just come on the floor from Washington State, I think everybody understands the significance and importance of exports to a state that is on the Pacific Rim and understands that story. But I don't think anyone really thinks about the XM Bank in conjunction with places like North Dakota. And so I want to take a few minutes today to talk about small business, talk about the people who have been dramatically affected by the closure of the XM Bank and why it's so important that we understand and appreciate and not have a history, long-term history here that does not move the XM Bank forward. So let's start out by talking about the 5,800 small businesses around the country that depend on the Export-Import Bank to finance export deals, and how many of them right now have no support as this issue has languished in the United States Senate. I think we all know that small business makes up a large percentage of that economic opportunity in the United States. That's true in North Dakota, and true probably to a greater extent because 95% of all employers in North Dakota qualify as small businesses. For many of these businesses, if they don't have help exporting their products, that help which the Export-Import Bank provides, they can't grow. With more than 95% of all consumers in the world living outside the United States, if businesses in the United States do not export, if they are not competitive, we will lose economically. And several of my colleagues who have been on the floor talking about manufacturing and talking about economic opportunity, at the end of the day, this is about small business, but it's also about the jobs that small business create. So we've seen companies like GE and Boeing, which use, interestingly enough, 16 suppliers in North Dakota are dependent on the work that GE and Boeing does. And as you look at GE and Boeing and their necessary reaction to the failure of this Congress to appropriately and timely reauthorize the XM Bank, they have had to look for other ways to encourage their business growth. And that encouragement has not been in this country. They have had to look overseas. And so it is critically important that we understand the idea of a supply chain. You know, everybody says, well, this is a bank for big business, this is a bank for these people, and that's just pure nonsense. In every one of those deals that's done for one of these major manufacturing, inside that deal are literally thousands of small businesses and hundreds of thousands of jobs created in those small businesses as they support the supply chain. So I want to talk about a number of the export-import users in my state and brag a little bit about the work that they do, because they're on the cutting edge a lot of their technologies. And so the first business I want to talk about is Amity Technology. It's a 20-year-old family-owned company based in Fargo that sells farm manufacturing equipment to companies around the world. They began in August of 1977. They sold their first business to Case International and then built Amity in the winter of 1996. Now, what I love to tell about this story is these brothers, one of which I went to college with, these brothers come from the family that actually created the Bobcat. And so they have been entrepreneurs, they have been inventors, and they have been innovators, and they have driven a lot of jobs in North Dakota. Amity is a big user of the XM Bank. It is the largest distributor of sugar beet equipment, working with some of the world's largest farm equipment companies across the world. But with agriculture markets slowing down, business is harder to come by. And so it is particularly important that they have all the tools in their arsenal. And without the help of the Export-Import Bank, the company, which employs 70 North Dakotans, could quickly lose out on at least 10% of their business and face tough questions about the future of their exports. The next business I want to talk about is WCCO Belting in Wapton. Wapton's a small community in far southeastern corner of our state. It is a 60-year-old family-owned rubber supply company, often used in farm equipment that's supplied to every major farm equipment company in the world. For 12 years, the Export-Import Bank has allowed WCCO Belting to continue to export opportunities it had previously been ignoring. The bank has supported over $850,000 in exports from the Belting Company since 2007. The company employs 200 employees who generate more than 60% of their annual revenue from customers who are located outside of the United States. That would not be possible if it were not for the XM Bank. That 60% of their business is driven by the opportunity that the XM Bank gives them. I want to talk about JM Grain. That's a small grain company in Garrison. They are a young family-owned pea, lentil, and chickpea distributing company that supplies their products to top packaging and food companies across the world. And when you look at their numbers, 15 million. In fact, 70% of the company's annual revenue for almost a decade has been backed by the XM Bank. It has allowed GM Grain to pursue export opportunities to top manufacturing and packaging food ingredient companies that demand buyers to provide financing for 90 to 100 days. Something they could not do on their own, and incidentally could not find a private bank who'd be willing to do it. Without the Export-Import Bank, GM Grain would not have been able to pursue exports to such high-quality, high-selling companies because it would have to significantly cut its price or risk going under. The company now has double or triple the pay of its workers, retaining its workforce throughout the oil boom, which has been awfully tough in North Dakota, giving high living costs, and has been able to hire top technological workers. It's incredible. It's an incredible story. But it's a story that would not be possible without the XM Bank. It's responsible for $10 million of the company's annual $15 million in revenue. Without the agency, without the Import Bank, the company would risk losing sales to competitive exporting companies abroad, including companies from India, China, and South America. Last business I want to talk about is equipment wholesalers based in Fargo, North Dakota, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They sell equipment like John Deere tractors in the United States and abroad. Equipment wholesalers told us that if the Export-Import Bank is not reauthorized, it will have a negative impact on the company's sales. How great is that? 35 to 40%. impact on their sales. Can you imagine that? Just because of the inactivity of Congress, we have risked 35 to 40% of this company's business. The company acknowledges that it's already lost business to companies in Germany that have access to Germany's Export-Import Agency. They say without the EXIM Bank being reauthorized, equipment wholesalers will lose even more business. While our businesses are left at a disadvantage because the Export-Import Bank expired, foreign Export-Import banks, including those in India and China and 60 other places around the world, are hugely benefiting. In fact, they're wondering, what is going on in the United States? But we're not going to let any grass grow under our feet as we run to daylight and take advantage of the inaction in Washington, D.C. They're already stepping in, and they're filling our place. If we do not reauthorize the Export-Import Bank to support American businesses and manufacturers, China and India will step in. There's no doubt about it. They're already doing it. In fact, they have, during the recent downturn in both of those economies, the first investment they made was putting billions more in their export credit agencies. You know why? Because it made business sense. It made sense to their balance of trade. It made sense to their economy to support their manufacturers, especially in an environment where we weren't supporting ours. And so last week, my bipartisan bill with Senator Kirk, which would reauthorize this agency, passed with the support of more than 70% of the House. And just yesterday, again, I'll repeat, the Export-Import Bank reauthorization was attached to the House Transportation Bill, and despite efforts to once again derail the Export-Import Bank from people who believed that they could kill it altogether, then those same people came trying to kill it with amendments. Over 2/3, in most cases, of House members voted against those export-import killing amendments. Doesn't that tell us something? Doesn't that tell us that the vast majority of people here are not ideologues? They look at the facts. They say, in what world would you not support exports? You know, we used to do this in state government when I was Attorney General and when I served on the Industrial Commission. We would talk about North Dakota's economy and we'd say, what do we do to grow economies? And we say, we have new wealth creation. Now, I'm not picking on retail businesses. Retail businesses typically, unless we're inviting Canadians, which we do, to come down and spend money, they're not new wealth creation. It's those things that bring new dollars to our state. If you look at new wealth creation in this country, and you look at what creates wealth in this country, guess what it is? It's exports. It's having a favorable balance of trade. It is making sure that we are a country that believes in reaching out to the 90 to 95% of the consumers in this world, saying we produce the best quality agricultural products. We produce the best quality manufactured products. We are the top supplier and the most trusted source of products in the world. But we need the tools to make those sales. And the EXIM Bank is a critical tool. It is part of that structure of trade infrastructure that we need to make this work. And I really sincerely hope, because I don't know whether I'm going to be here when we go through this again, but I hope the lessons of the last 3 months have been learned. I hope that the lessons that we have been preaching for really since this spring, that we cannot let this bank expire and there will be dire consequences if we do, I hope that lesson's been learned and that the EXIM Bank and the people at the EXIM Bank, but more importantly, that our American businesses that rely on the Export Bank, our jobs that rely on the Export Bank, and our opportunities that the Export-Import Bank are never forgotten, that they're never left behind. And so, once again, we have cleared yet another hurdle. The light is at the end of the tunnel. We believe that we are ready and willing and excited about the opportunity of once again opening up the doors of the Export-Import Bank and welcoming American business in, and say once again, America is open for business to the rest of the world. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor to my friend from Washington. I just want to maybe make one final point along with my colleague from Washington State. I find it interesting. I don't know how many times the senator from Washington and I have been down on the floor telling the story of the EXIM Bank, telling the story about what the problems have been since we have closed the bank for business, talking about what this means for small business, trying to reflect the amazement that we get from our small businesses on why is this happening when we return money to the Treasury, this doesn't cost anything. And I find it kind of curious that as many times as we have been down here, there has been no one down here arguing the counterpoint. There's been no one down here willing to ask us to yield for a question about why we believe what we believe about the EXIM Bank. There's no one down here challenging what we're saying about the EXIM Bank. I kind of find that interesting. And I think that it is a lesson maybe for the future that, let's not mess around with jobs. Let's not mess around with people. And, I think everybody thinks that they're picking on some kind of large corporation. But the reality is that those large corporations in many ways can wait this out, or they can devise a business plan that gives them a workaround from the EXIM Bank, or they can assemble their materials someplace else other than the United States. But my small businesses, the ones I just outlined for you, they don't have that choice. And they don't have a big line of credit where they can just wait this out. They don't have the ability to wait. And, it is one thing to say you're all about small business and helping small business. We hear it every time. It's the two great lines that are used here. We care about the middle class and we care about small business. But let me tell you, as it relates to the EXIM Bank, there has been no activity here that would actually prove the point that we care about small business. And so, and just for the record, want to say I do find it extraordinarily curious that we have gone unchallenged in this whole discussion. No one really wants to take us on because at the end of the day, there's no argument on the other side. But yet we've closed this bank for over 3 months. We've closed this bank and this opportunity to American manufacturers, to American small businesses, and to all of the great people who work there. And just know that I am so grateful for the work that my colleague from Washington, she has been absolutely an incredible leader. I want to thank her for everything that she's done. The nation's expert on the Export-Import Bank, but also a woman who has been in business most of her life and who understands the critical importance of the EXIM Bank. And so let's not unlearn this lesson. Let's make sure this never happens again and that we never disrupt Americans' economic opportunity the way we have by shutting down the Export-Import Bank for the last 3-4 months. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.